Welcome back to our concrete house. Today, we are going to take a look at how my wife and I made this modern concrete planter. You will need the following materials: melamine board, countertop concrete mix, a sheet of acrylic plastic, angle brackets, wood screws, and tape. Links to these products are available in the description. We wanted the planter to be a 10-inch cube, so we got started by cutting the melamine to size on the table saw. The cut dimensions of all 5 pieces will be shown in the next clip. The bottom piece is 10 inches by 10 inches. 2 of the sides are 11.5 by 10 3/4, and the opposite sides are 10 inches by 10 3/4. Now it was time to assemble the box. I used a brad nailer to tack it together to make it easier to secure with screws. Once this was done, we drilled pilot holes and screwed the box together. Here is a look at what the finished box should look like. Now we moved on to building the inner box out of the acrylic sheet. Again, we used the table saw to cut the pieces to size. The bottom piece measures 6.5 by 6.5 inches. 2 of the sides measure 6.5 by 8.5 inches, and the opposite 2 pieces measure 6 7/8 by 8.5 inches. We use mylar tape to hold the box together, but any thin tape that doesn't have a texture will work. Now the 2 angle brackets are taped into place on opposite sides of the box. We also used a piece of scrap acrylic to help brace the sidewalls from bending inward when the concrete is poured around the box. Next, we want to place the inner box in the center of the outer box. Each side should be 1.5 inches from the outer wall. Once it was evenly spaced, we marked the drill holes and labeled the sides so we wouldn't install it backwards later. Now we screwed the brackets in place. We also used a piece of scrap wood as an additional support to keep the box from floating upwards when the concrete is poured. It was time to remove the inner box and start mixing concrete. A 5.5 gallon bucket and a mixer attachment for a drill worked nicely to get the concrete mixed to a proper consistency. After mixing, we dumped half of the concrete mix into the box and worked it into the corners of the bottom. Next, the inner box was carefully rocked into place and secured with screws. We continued to fill up the rest of the sidewalls with concrete until it was almost all the way up to the top. Using a rubber mallet, we tapped on all of the sidewalls to release as many air bubbles as possible. Once this was done, we used a small trowel to smooth out the surface. Finally, the wood brace was installed, and we used a trash bag as a cover to keep the concrete from drying out too quickly and cracking. Throughout the week, we sprayed down the concrete with water to help keep in some moisture. After 7 days, it was time to pull the cover off and start removing the forms. We were hoping to reuse the acrylic pieces to make more planters, but they held in place more than we were expecting, and we ended up having to crack them to remove them. Once this was done, we unscrewed the outer box and pulled the sidewalls off. The bottom piece was stuck pretty good, so we used a chisel to carefully pry it loose. If you're going for a more rough and rustic look, then your planter is done and ready to use. If you want a more finished look, a wet polisher can be used to smooth out the surface and reveal the beautiful pieces of aggregate rock. We started with a coarse 50 grit and worked our way all the way up to 3000 grit for a nice shiny polish. All that was left was to transfer a snake plant into the planter and we were done. We really liked how the planter turned out and decided to make a stand for it. Look for that in the next video.